Alright, you have your pajamas on, you got your teeth brushed, you have your lovies, time to get into bed, cuddle up, curl up with your blanket, and let's begin. This story I've known for a long time. When I was a little kid, one time I was grocery shopping with Grandma and Grandpa, and in the store there was a TV with a movie rolling, and me and my brothers, we just sat around this TV the whole time while Grandma and Grandpa went grocery shopping. And we just were encaptured by this movie. We had no idea what we were watching, but we just loved what we saw. And so when Grandma and Grandpa came back from grocery shopping, when they were all done, we pleaded with them to let us buy this movie. And so they did. And as soon as we got home, we watched it from beginning to end, went to bed, woke up the next morning, watched it over and over and over again. We watched it so many times that the tape broke and we had to buy a new one. And so this one will be a pretty good one, I think. A little long, but let's begin. So cuddle up. The Princess and the Goblins. Princess Esme lived high in the mountains in a towering castle. Her mother had died when she was a baby, and though her father, the king, loved his daughter very much, he was often away, touring the kingdom, or in the city, attending to the estates. Instead, Esme had her nanny, Loti, to care for her, and the palace servants for company. She loved her mountain home, with its sparkling streams and cool, clear air, and the flowers that bloomed in spring. But one thing made her sad. She was never allowed outside after sunset. The ceiling in her bedroom was painted dark blue with silver stars, but she longed to be out in the night air and to lie on the ground beneath a canopy of real stars. "I wish I could go out," she said one beautiful evening, watching the deepening shadows of the sunbeams fall on the mountains. "You can't," said Loti, her nanny. "You know the king forbids it." "But why can't I go out?" pleaded Esme. "You're too young to know why," said Loti. "Now be a good girl while I go about my chores." But on this particular evening, Esme couldn't settle. She longed to explore, and if she couldn't go outside, she decided she would wander the castle. It was so huge. She knew there were turrets she had never visited before, so she slipped out of her room and through one door, and then another. And on she went, down endless passageways, up and down twisting stairs. Wherever she looked, there were cobwebs draped like dusty necklaces, while the wind whistled around the turrets. "I'm lost," she whispered after a while, stopping by yet another door and realizing with rising panic that she had no idea how to get back. "I'm not afraid," she tried to tell herself. "I'm a princess, and princesses are brave. I'll have to help myself." Then, in the silence, came a whirring, humming noise. At first, Esme thought it was the wind, but as she followed the sound, it grew louder. She climbed some stairs, and the humming grew louder still. Esme opened the door where the sound seemed loudest. Inside was a little room with a lady, spinning. She had silver hair that hung in long waves to the floor, and a lamp above her, round as a ball and shining as if it was with the brightest moonlight. There was a fire, too, which flickered with flames shaped like roses, piled up in a glowing red heap in the hearth. "Come in, Esme," said the old lady. "How do you know my name?" "It's my name, too," smiled the old lady. "I gave it to you when you were born. I am your great-great-grandmother." "Have you always lived here, great-great-grandmother?" asked Esme, her eyes wide. "You can just call me grandmother," the old lady replied with a smile. "Yes, I've always lived here. I stay here so I can take care of you." "But why have I never met you before?" "Well, my dear," her grandmother replied, "you've never needed me before. Now, see what I've been spinning for you." As she spoke, the grandmother held out a shimmering ball of white spun silk. "Thank you," said Esme politely. "Is it for me to play with?" "It's not a toy," said her grandmother, going to a cupboard. She took out a ring with a glittering stone that changed in the firelight from red to blue to green to white. "It's beautiful," said Esme. "It's a fire opal," said her grandmother. "Put it on your finger. It's yours." "How lovely!" exclaimed Esme, admiring it. Her grandmother took the silk-spun ball and wound some silk around the ring. "There, Esme," she said. "Now you have it." "No, grandmother," Esme corrected her. "I have your ring, but you have my ball." "You have the ball too," her grandmother replied, "fastened to the fire opal on the ring." "I don't understand," said Esme. "Feel its thread with your fingers." Esme stretched out her hands into the air in front of her. With a cry of delight, she touched the strand. It glimmered briefly, then disappeared, but she could feel it in between her fingers, as light and strong as spider silk. "I can feel it," she cried. "When the ring glitters, follow the thread," said her grandmother. "It may take you to strange places, but you must trust it. While you hold to it, I hold to it too." "I promise, grandmother," said Esme. "It must be magic. Are you magic as well?" "I am old," her grandmother laughed. "I thought being old meant being slow and not being able to see well. You are not like that. Being old means, or ought to mean, strength and wisdom, courage and beauty. I am older than you can imagine, and I am happy here up in the rafters with the cooing doves for company." "Can I bring my nanny Loti to see you?" asked Esme. "And my father, the king, when he comes next?" "You can try," said her grandmother, "but I'm afraid they wouldn't believe you if you told them about me, or even be able to see me." "But they must believe me," said Esme. "We all want to be believed and to be understood," said her grandmother. "But there is one thing that's much more important." "And what is that?" asked Esme. "To understand other people. That's the beginning of kindness. Now shut your eyes, Esme. When you open them, you'll find yourself tucked up in your own bed." Esme woke to find herself exactly where her grandmother had said, with moonlight shining through the curtains. A moment later, Loti came bursting into her room. "Oh, you naughty girl!" she exclaimed, half crying, half angry. "Why did you run off like that? Thank goodness you're safe. I was afraid—" She broke off abruptly. "What were you afraid of?" asked Esme. "Never mind that now," Loti replied. "Where were you?" I went to see my great-great-grandmother, who lives at the very top of the castle. Now don't go making up stories, said Loti, wagging her finger. I'm not, protested Esme. Look at my ring. My great-great-grandmother gave it to me, and it has an invisible thread, too. You've probably always had that ring, and as for invisible thread, what nonsense. Esme began to feel cross, but then she remembered her grandmother's words. Perhaps it was too hard for Loti to believe in magical great-great-grandmothers and invisible threads. Never mind, said Esme. Let's not argue. Shall we go for a walk tomorrow up the mountain? Let's, said Loti, hugging her close. And so the next afternoon they set off up the mountain. Esme jumped in the sparkling streams that tumbled and splashed down the slopes, and played with the wild goats and their kids. Neither she nor Loti noticed the setting sun casting its long, dark shadows. Look, Loti, cried Esme. There's a strange little face looking at us. Loti took one look and turned pale with fright. We mustn't be out a moment longer, she cried. She grabbed Esme by the hand and began to run. What is that? Asked Esme. And why are we running? Loti didn't answer. She just ran faster than ever until Esme tripped over a rock, grazing her hands and knees. Oh! She cried in a heap on the ground. I'm bleeding, and my clothes are torn, and I'm sure I can hear someone laughing. Who is it? She called into the shadows. No one, said Loti, trying to lift Esme to her feet. Only the wind. Ha ha ha! Lies! Whispered a chorus of voices, echoing from the stones around the path. I'm sure I can hear something, said Esme, and it isn't the wind. By now, Loti was shaking. We're lost, and I don't know where we are, and it's getting dark. Then, strolling towards them, came one of the boys who worked in the mountain mines. He was smudged and dirty, and he whistled as he walked. What are you doing out after dark? Said the boy. You could get caught by the... Shh! Don't say the word, hissed Loti. Now, boy, she wanted hurriedly, do you know the way back to the castle? Of course I do, said the boy. Then take us there at once, ordered Loti. And Princess, don't listen to anything he says. I hope they didn't hear you call her Princess, whispered the boy. If they did, they're sure to know her again. They are very clever. But I'll get you back. I know this path, and the castle isn't far. The boy began to walk, with Loti following him. Esme's hand clutched tightly in her own, and that was when Esme saw them properly. Strange, shadowy creatures scattering before them across the path. I really can see something, she said. What are they? Please tell me. I'd rather not know than not know. Goblins, of course, said the boy, and he ran into their midst, stamping on their bare feet. At each stamp, there was a yell of rage, and the goblins dashed away into the shadows again. Esme watched him in amazement. Goblins have hard heads, explained the boy, smiling at her as he spoke, but very soft feet, and they hate having them stomped on. The other trick is not to be afraid. Where do they come from? Asked Esme, trying very hard not to be afraid. Goblins live deep in the mountains, replied the boy. They like cold, dark places, and only come out at night. They hate people. They hate the miners who work in the mountains, but more than anything, they hate the king. We don't know the reason why, and I expect if you asked them, they wouldn't know either. But why did no one tell me about them? We didn't want you to worry, said Loti. Before Esme could ask any more questions, they reached the castle door. Don't be out late again, Princess, warned the boy. Goblins can be dangerous, you know. Loti hurried them inside, but Esme turned back. Wait, she insisted. We haven't thanked the boy yet. "What's your name?" she asked him. "Curdie." "Thank you, Curdie," said Esme, hugging him. "Really, Princess," said Loti. She hustled Esme inside and closed the door behind them. Curdie left the castle and walked on, down the path to his little cottage. It was tiny and shabby, but his mother had made it a snug little heaven on the mountainside. As he came in, his parents were at the table, with supper all laid out. "The goblins have seen the princess," Curdie told them as he sat down to eat. "I'm worried about her. The castle people don't look after her properly." "She should be protected," said his father. "We all know how much the goblins hate the king." "Don't worry, father," said Curdie. "I am going to spend the night down the mine. That way I can listen in on the goblins' plans." He was thinking, too, that he could work while he was down there and earn extra money to buy his mother a warm shawl for when the cold came. "You're a good boy," said his mother as he set out that night. "Keep safe. Nothing in the world is as precious to me as you are." Under the shining light of the moon, Curdie made his way up the mountain, slipping through the caverns where he worked, edging himself down the snaking passages. And then he crept further and deeper into the heart of the mountain, further and deeper still, until, at last, he heard goblin voices. He picked away at some loose stones, very softly, so they wouldn't hear, and made a tiny window in their secret world. He saw a group of them gathered around a fire in a gloomy cavern. The goblins had stones in their hair, glowing in dull, gorgeous shades in the firelight. Two wore spiky silver crowns. "It's a meeting with the Goblin King and Queen," Curdie thought to himself, hardly believing his luck. "Great news," said the king. "The tunnels we've been digging are now directly underneath the castle. We'll break through early tomorrow morning and invade." "That will be fun," crowed the queen. Curdie kept closer to hear better. But to his horror, the rocks beneath his feet began to wobble, then collapsed beneath him, pebbles scattering everywhere. Curdie toppled head over heels through the loose stones, landing right at the goblin's feet. "Ooh, what have we here?" shouted the king. "A human spy!" "Lock him up!" squealed the queen. Good idea. Get him!" ordered the king. Hundreds of goblins guards surged into the cave, shouting and waving their fists at Curdie. He began stomping on their feet as fast as he could, but there were far too many for him to reach them all. The goblins overpowered him and threw him into a hole beside the cave. Curdie could hear them whispering, but however hard he listened, he couldn't catch their words. Then, as a group of them dragged a stone slab across the opening, he heard a wisp of their conversation. "Only one more thing than stamping feet, and that's the power of rhyme." Just as Curdie was puzzling over this, the last glimmer of light disappeared. Now he was all alone in the dark, knowing the castle was in danger, and he couldn't do a thing to help. In her bedroom painted with stars, Esme woke suddenly to see her ring glittering brightly in the darkness. "What's this?" she wondered. "Does grandmother need me?" She rose from her bed, feeling the gossamer line of thread. To her surprise, it didn't lead her deeper into the castle, but outside, into the garden, and up the mountainside. She was cold in the chill night air, but she didn't care. She knew she had to follow the magic thread, just as she had promised her grandmother. The mountain path became steeper, till it was hardly a path at all, just a stumbling, uneven drift of stones. Esme was puzzled, but she kept her hand on the thread, and on and up she went, till it took her to a small hole in the side of the mountain, not much bigger than a badger's. She slipped inside, and she found she was in a cave, echoing with drips of water. Esme felt very far from her own safe castle. The thread led her through the cave, down dark passages, so low she had to crouch, then crawl on her hands and knees. Her ring assured her, because in the darkness it was glowing like a friendly little fire. Now the thread took her to a heap of stones by a wall. And then, bewilderingly, it stopped. "What shall I do?" Esme wondered, feeling her courage slipping away. "Should I go home?" But when she turned back, she couldn't feel the thread. It was telling her to go through the stones. "Grandmother must have brought me here for a reason," she said. "I'll have to keep trying." She began to undo the pile of stones, even as they slipped through her fingers, cutting her with their jagged edges. At last the pile was at an end, and now only one great stone was left. "Who's there?" said a voice. "Oh, Curdy," Esme called back. "Is that you?" "It's me, Esme." "I've been trapped in this cave by the goblins," Curdy called back. "What are you doing here?" "My grandmother sent me. I must be here to rescue you. I've undone all the stones, and if you push the big one now, I think it will move." Curdy gave it a great shove, and it fell with a crash. Out he stepped, blinking with amazement. "Let's go," Esme said. "Easier said than done," replied Curdy. "I'm a miner, and even I don't know all these passages." "We'll just follow the thread," said Esme. "What do you mean?" asked Curdy. "It's a gift from my great-grandmother. She lives in a turret in the castle, in a room with fire roses and a lamp that shines like the moon. She gave me this ring with an invisible thread. She said I should trust it. I'm sure it will lead us out of here." Esme could tell from Curdy's expression that he didn't believe a word. But he followed her all the same, amazed at the way she led him through the darkness, winding this way and that through the narrow passages, till at last they emerged on the mountainside just as the sun was rising. "Do you believe me now, Curdy?" asked Esme. "I don't know," said Curdy, scratching his head. "But we have to hurry. I overheard the goblins' plans while I was down in the mines, and they're going to invade the castle. We have to warn everyone." Hand in hand, they rushed back into the castle. But by the time they pushed through the huge front door, it was already too late. Everywhere was awash with goblins. They swarmed from every nook and cranny, bursting out of cupboards, squirming up from cracks in the floorboards, and leaping through the windows. In the great hall, the goblin king and queen sat on thrones, grinning gleefully, while the castle servants huddled in the corner, shivering with fear. "Stomp on their feet!" cried Curdy. "The goblins hate that!" He and Loti sprang into action, stamping as many and as hard as they could. Curdy was like a small whirlwind, and away scattered the goblins. Before long, they were all fleeing, howling, limping, shrieking, trying to hold their feet in their hands. At last, the hall was empty. "Wait!" cried Loti. "Where's the princess?" "The goblin king and queen took her," said breathless servant, running in from outside. "I tried to stop them, but they wore stone shoes on their feet, so no matter how hard I stamped, it didn't make a difference." "I'll find the princess," said Curdie, rushing out the door. But then he stopped for a moment, wondering which way to go. Above his head he saw a light, round and shining like the moon, and he thought of what Esme had told him about her grandmother. He reached out, and to his amazement he felt a thread between his fingers, as light and strong as spider silk. He followed the thread back up the mountain, and there was Esme being dragged away by the Goblin King and Queen. Suddenly he remembered the words he had overheard in the cave. "Rhyme!" he called out to Esme. "They hate rhyme!" Curdie desperately tried to think of a rhyme himself, but his mind had gone blank. He started running towards Esme, but she was far ahead by now. How would he ever find her in the mountain? Esme watched him running. She knew he'd never reach her in time. "I'm a princess," she told herself bravely. "I have to help myself." And despite her rising panic, she began to chant any rhyme that came into her head. "Hush, shush, scurry! Go in a hurry! Gobble, gobble, goblin! There you go a-wobblin'! Hobble, hobble, hobblin'! Hob-bob, goblin!" The Goblin King and Queen loosed their hold and covered their ears. "No!" they shouted. "Stop that! Stop!" "Keep going!" called Curdie, still running up the mountain path. More and more words tripped off Esme's tongue. She felt their power, their magic, the way they fizzled and crackled through the air. 1, 2, pick a shoe. 3, 4, shut the door. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. 9, 10, go again. The Goblin King and Queen could bear it no longer. They raced away from Esme, howling as sure as if their tender feet had been struck. "You did it, Esme!" cried Curdie, reaching her at last. "You did it!" They watched the goblins disappear back into the darkness of the mountain. When they had gone, Curdie saw a vision he would never forget. A tall old lady dressed in silver, radiant as a star. "Well done," she said to both of them, smiling. "You showed true courage today, and you won't have to worry about the goblins ever again." "We won't?" asked Curdie. "From now on, you'll find that both their heads and their hearts will become softer, even as their feet grow harder. Now, go quickly," she went on. "The king has returned. He is waiting for Esme in the great hall." Curdie found himself giving a little bow, for there was something about the old lady, perhaps as the way she looked at him, or the kindness in her voice, that made him feel very humble. Esme hugged her grandmother tight. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Then Curdie and Esme hurried on towards the castle. "I'm so glad you saw my grandmother too," said Esme, "and that you believe in her." Curdie took one last look over his shoulder, but as he did so, the vision of the old lady began to flicker and fade. A moment later, all he saw was a faint shimmer, and then a dove flying away in the last of the dawn light. When they reached the castle, a great cheer went up. The king, his face fraught, rushed towards Esme and caught her up in his arms. "I was coming back to see you," he said, "and then I saw goblins fleeing the castle, and I feared they'd captured you." "I'm safe now," said Esme. "Curdie helped me, and grandmother." For a moment the king couldn't speak for joy, or take in anything else but his own Esme, clasped in his embrace. "I'm going to bring you back to the castle," said the king. "I don't want to be without you again." Then he turned to Curdie. "How can I reward you? Would you like to come with us? Anything you ask for, it's yours." But Curdie shook his head. "I must stay with my parents," he said. "But I would like a shawl for my mother, to keep her warm when winter comes." "Is that all?" asked the king. "Of course you shall have one, the finest ever made. But if you ever need anything else, you only have to ask." The next day, the king took Esme away on his horse. Loti was to follow later in a carriage. Esme hugged her goodbye, and then the servants. Her last hug was for Curdie. "It's not goodbye, Curdie," she promised him as they rode away. "I won't let it be." And one day, the princess and Curdie did meet again. But that, as they say, is another story. The end. All right. That was a good long one. So, close your eyes. I love you. And I'll see you in the morning. Good night.